So it says class 2. I got confused whenever I looked at this because we actually had kickoff and I didn't know if that counted as a class or not, but here we are, officially lecture 2. So welcome again. What we are going to do today is go over chapters 5 and 6. And then we're going to do a lot of demoing of the examples and that JavaScript project. And then I'm also going to touch on the graded assignments, not the procedures or policies, because that's what Jamarco is going to talk about at the end. More of the GitHub and the that kind of stuff, the technical stuff. So again, I'm going to try. I don't like the wording of these as much as I do of the other one, but at the end, you should be able to use booleans with equality. So it's equal signs, less than, greater than sign. Logical, that's the and or. To write conditional. Conditionals are if statements. So then we're going to understand the basics of truthy and falsy values. I don't think that was in the material, but that's going to help secure up some things that that some of you are seeing when you are trying. And then we're going to be able to look at some error messages. I'm not going to dive into error messages too much, but definitely I'm going to try to show a couple and show you how that I problem solve those. And then definitely some other debugging techniques so that you can always have correct code. So the first thing is we're going to make decisions. Whenever they talk about AI, well, machine learning is something slightly different, but typically like your AI, when you're talking about like chatbots, it's just like, if the person types in this, do this. And it's kind of like a tree branching scheme. And that's exactly what we're going to be doing, making decisions with conditionals, with some if statements. So some of these I'll go over in more detail in a second, but I just want a high-level overview. So there's Boolean values. Go ahead and put in the chat, what are your Boolean values? Whenever somebody says that, what are you trying to think of? Exactly. Yeah, true and false. There's only two. There's true or false, which makes it very easy for computers to evaluate. There's conversions. And then some expressions, some operators. So we'll talk about those in a little bit. There's also in JavaScript. So remember, my background's more Java. We don't have this loose equality in Java. It's either equal or it's not. And actually, we have almost an overly strict where when we get there, instead of making it equal, if it's an object, we have to like actually call a method and sometimes even define what equals means. So it's very, very strict in Java. But JavaScript, it assumes a lot of stuff for you, which then is sometimes good as a beginner, because then if you accidentally, type something different, but it really kind of means the same thing, sometimes JavaScript picks up on that if it's a common enough issue. But then sometimes it makes things harder because then you think you have it right, but it sometimes doesn't work like you think. Logical operators, those are and or. I heard that some people struggling a little bit with that, so we're going to talk about those. The truth tables, I'm going to show a picture of, but I also have a math background, and we'd have to do truth tables for a lot of different things. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them just because I've seen them too much. And then conditionals, so if, else, and else if, and then nested conditionals. So let's just go over conditionals very, very slowly here, because we need to make sure we understand this. So if, but this is how like the text, if, then there's some kind of condition, and that condition should evaluate to either true or false. If it doesn't evaluate to true or false, JavaScript is fine, and it thinks it knows how to handle those things. That's what we're going to be talking about here in a second. But in most languages, if you don't get a true or false expression there, it will actually throw an error, but JavaScript does not. So in this one, this top one, if student in lecture, so variables can be true or false. Oftentimes we do set them as true and false. So if student in lecture, like right now, all of you guys are in the lecture, if that was true, then we would print out here, student is happy. So the question is, what does student in lecture need to be to execute happy? And you should be thinking it should be true. Now, some of you are thinking, well, logically, could it be yes? Is student in the lecture? Yes. Which, whenever we talk about computer language, when we have a yes or no question, that goes back to that Boolean. If you are answering something and it's supposed to be yes or no, oftentimes we program it as a Boolean with true or false. So definitely start thinking about that kind of mentality of if it's a yes or no, it should be true, false, it should be a Boolean. And then the question here, which we'll talk about, is functionally correct versus logically correct, meaning does it function? If I typed in yes here, like if I did an input and somebody said yes, this would still run. It would still execute and it would still print out as happy. Logically, though, would we want it to? Probably not, because we'd want true. Because then when we're going to see here in a little bit is even if I type in no, or I type in I don't know, or if I type in to, all of those would actually make this expression run, which is crazy in JavaScript. Again, it wouldn't in other languages, but JavaScript's weird. So this bottom one, though, we're talking about numbers in this case. So hours work, less than or equal to 8. So if it was 0, 1, 2, technically even negatives, even though logically, you remember, logically, can you work -2 hours? Not really, but -2 would satisfy this. So just know that there's a difference between it running and it running logically, and that goes into the debugging aspect. So let's go on to else. So with if and else, same thing, if condition, true or false. If it's true, that top part gets executed. Else means if it's not true, no matter what it is, no matter if it doesn't make sense, the else block is going to be ran. For instance, if student in lecture, if we said that was true, then the student is happy, is fine. If I said false, that's what we're hoping is, and hoping that it would be either true or false, then student is not happy. But if I typed in, this is going to be a weird one that I will show you in a little bit. If I type anything besides some very key values, this top one's going to run almost every single time. And that's because that JavaScript with truthy versus falsy. But the hours worked. Let's do this one, because this one actually has an evaluation part of this less than or equal to. If I typed in any number less than 8, so if I typed in -2, this need more coffee would run. But if I typed in 9 or 10, then it would do this else. Then we have the if, else, if, else. You don't always have to have that else at the end. You could just do an if and else if. But the biggest difference here is if I am trying to segment like branch 3 different branches, this is exactly how I want to do it. Because if you do an if else and then separately an if else, that's a different type of branching than what most people do here, which is you have 3 different paths that you can go down, such as if you do hours work, if you had less than 4, then you're going to need more coffee. If it's less than 8, then you're going to be in a carb coma because of lunch. And then anything else, you're going to need more sleep. So whenever we look at this, the reason we do this is the hours worked being 2. So if I had hours worked being 2, right here, this would be true. So it'd need more coffee. If I did not have this else block, so let's say we did not have this else block, 2 would work here and 2 would work here. So it would actually go 2 different paths. It would state both need more coffee and carb coma. It wouldn't just do one or the other. So that else enforces that only one of these 3 things get executed. 2 of them cannot get executed. Only one of these 3 can get executed as you go through here. So these are those truth tables I was talking about. So if we have some expression like hours of work less than 8 is true, and then pants that you wore to work were jeans was true, then it'd be true if it's an and statement. These and means, most of you picked up on this because I was reading some of that homework help. most of you agree that in the and, both of them have to be true for the whole entire expression to be true. On the other hand, if it's or, either one can be true, and it sets the whole thing to be true. It's hard with these truth tables to really understand this without examples, so we're going to do some live coding and later, and we'll go over some of these. But here's what was not in the book that I'm definitely going to do during our live coding. Remember, the first time I did a lecture, a little bit of live coding, and then lecture, and then a little bit of live coding. And to be honest, I do want your feedback after all of this to see which one you like best. But these falsy values, these 1, 2, 3, even though those are different quotes, these are double quotes or single quotes, but they're empty strings. Null, undefined, or NaN. Does anybody want to chat what they put in the chat what NaN stands for again? There we go. Yeah, not a number. So these 6 things, if you just put those in, they are going to evaluate to false by themselves. So you're not asking if they're anything. If you say false, if you say 0, if you type an empty string, null, undefined, or not a number, it's going to return false. Everything else returns true. Obviously, true returns true. Here's the weird one that some of you were talking about in the chat. You were like, if I type in false as a string, why does it return true? Because the computer does not know that this is false. It thinks this is false without the quotes. So you need, if you put quotes, it just knows that it's a string and it's a non-empty string. So it's true. It's true. If you put a blank string but include a space, so right here, this is the thing that's different between this, and this has no space. Those are single quotes, not a double quote. There is a character in there. So a space, even though us in reading most languages like English, a space means something, which it does, but we think of it as blank. The computer still has to calculate that, and so it is just like any other keyboard press. You had to press something, so it's not empty anymore. We have not talked about arrays or objects. That's maybe next time. Arrays, but if you see these symbols, even though they're empty, if you see those symbols or a function that's empty, all of those still evaluate to true. So again, we'll talk about arrays, objects, and functions later, but the biggest thing here is these 6 things. And remember, at the very beginning, I said, what are you going to be able to do at the end of this? It isn't that I need you to memorize all 6 of these, but you need to understand that if these 6 come up, they will evaluate to false every single time, where the other ones evaluate to true. And you need to be able to Google JavaScript truthy falsy to figure out which ones are the false ones. Not that you have to memorize them. All right. I know that there's some advanced people in here. So anytime I can, I'm going to throw in an advanced slide for you. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I will show an example in live coding, and I'm just going to breeze right past it. So for those of you that are like, I'm already overwhelmed, just ignore me for the next like 15 seconds. But there is a way called a ternary operator, a ternary conditional, that you can write an if statement like this. Super clean in one line. So what that does is your if condition goes right here. You put a question mark. It's always a question mark. If it's true, the first value goes, and if it's false, the second value goes. It's a if else. That's all it is. So if it's true, value 1, value 2. So I'm going to show this later. But let's say I wanted to say going to pass, and I would say my condition is if the number of posts is less than 10, and that's true. So if they did 8 posts, what would be set to this going to pass is going to be this first one. So if this is true, this would get set right there in that variable. And if it's false, the other one would get set. So my variable name is going to pass in this case. And I'll show this off. There you go. Now everybody can join back in because we all going to go over some errors in debugging. So remember, debugging, there's some kind of, they say it's a myth because nobody can prove it, but way back whenever computers were first invented, there was something like a moth that went into the circuits and like actually broke all the computers, and because everything was like electrical, everything, and so whenever they would actually get bugs that would break their computers. So that's, I don't know if that's true or not, but that's why they call it debugging. We're going to talk about stages of JavaScript execution. This is to help us whenever we see errors, or to preemptively see errors, so that we're not fighting that all the time. Kinds of errors, we're going to talk about that briefly. But again, some of this stuff, some of it, it's stuff that you just need to be able to Google or reference back to. This is not something that I look at every day of my software engineering career. There are high-level stuff that, like the stages of execution, are kind of important, but the actual kind of errors aren't as important. They're good to be able to Google. There's some coding tips and tools for debugging that I'm going to show you in VS Code. And then Chapter 6 talked about asking good questions. So stages of JavaScript execution. This is from the book. When I try to Google this, languages have evolved. So some of this gets very muddied. And it takes a full computer science degree to talk about like operating systems, compilers, interpreters, all this kind of stuff to fully understand this. So understand there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes that you don't need to know about. What you do need to know about is whenever you say run, when you hit that run button or the debug, or you say node space index.js, what basically happens, like at high level. And the first thing it's going to do is it's just going to scan your code, and it's going to say, are all the syntax things there that are needed? Or are you writing a Python script, writing in Python language, and you're trying to run it as a JavaScript? It's going to look for those things. And it's going to see, can I convert whatever you wrote into executable code? It's not actually executing it at this point. It is just validating, did you follow the JavaScript rules? What's really nice about this is VS Code and most IDEs will catch almost all of these for you. They'll underline them in red or call them something, and you'll be able to see those. But then it's the execution ones that you really got to worry about, because the VS Code doesn't usually catch, and it isn't until you run or execute it that it has a problem. There are a couple people, so this may not make sense to everybody, but they ran their assignment, graded assignment 1, and got no runtime errors. And then they did the NPM test, and they got a bunch of errors. And what's weird is it was on lines that were clear down at the bottom that you didn't even touch, but you did touch up at the top. So what happened was, whenever you did node index.js, it only ran certain lines, and those other lines were hidden inside of functions, and they were never called by your program. So there were errors in your code, but because they were never ran, these runtime errors did not happen. But whenever you run a test, those tests are going to hit every single function individually. So the functions that you weren't even doing in part 1 are getting run in your test. And that's why that would sometimes error out in the test, but it would not error out whenever you ran your code. So again, if that didn't make 100% sense, I might try to explain it once I get to the live coding. But I know some of you are having problems with my code. When I do node index.js, it works fine. But when I hit my test, it throws some kind of runtime exception, something. That's the reason why, is the tests are actually running your functions, where your code is not calling them yet until part 2 or 3 of the graded assignment. So because it never ran it didn't know there was an error. There are 3 main types of errors that are good to know. Syntax errors. These are vocabulary that I would even use whenever I'm talking to you, or hopefully your IAs are talking to you, and they're using these 3 vocabulary words. They're talking about syntax. If you hear that it's a syntax issue, it is something that we told you in JavaScript you need to be able to write in a very specific way. It has to have an open and closed parentheses. You know, numbers should not have quotes around them. You know, just anything like that. For example, this thing says let day equals Wednesday, but it doesn't have quotes around it because it needs to be a string, because Wednesday needs to be a string. So this is a syntax error. Those are what we mean by syntax. And then semicolons. Yes, you see the semicolon here. Many of you have realized that semicolons aren't absolutely necessary in modern versions of JavaScript. But when we get to Java, if you don't get used to putting those, it will become an issue. Runtime exceptions. This is once you hit run and it tries to run your code, something goes wrong in the middle. Most of the time, most of the ones that I've seen so far are like a variable is not defined yet. So that's one that they purposely did in your example, that if you would have ran it, like, I can't remember, light, ignition light or something light, it wasn't set before they called it in an if statement. And so it should have thrown this error, some kind of exception that says this variable is not defined yet. But it doesn't check that before it runs. It checks that as it runs in JavaScript. And then logic ones, the code runs. But whenever you type in what you think you should, it does not return what you think it should. So those are logic errors. So for instance, somebody pointed this: why does console log or like false or true actually return false? Kind of weird. So is JavaScript. So the other thing is, I linked to this up here. I'm just going to click on it and come right back. This is the actual other error type: syntax error, reference error, type error. You might bookmark this or be able to Google this, either way, but you will see these types of errors in what you're doing, and this is a good reference sheet for those, so I didn't want to put that back on the slide. But now, the hardest ones to debug are logic errors, because your IDE and your interpreter will catch the other ones for you, but logic ones, they will not. The computer's doing exactly what you told it to. You just told it the wrong thing. So best way, fastest way, they did this in chapter 6. They had you run some code that had two things, and at the end, it didn't do what you needed to. So it commented out the second part, and it just ran the first part, and you're like, oh, that's printing exactly what I want. It's not supposed to launch. But then in the second one, it overrode that it's not supposed to launch, but it is supposed to launch. And so by printing, they did all of these, which is nice. They're printing the console log, what your variables should be. They're chunking the code so that you only are looking at individual sections. And then as they go, they're going to keep it working, meaning if the first section doesn't work, you're going to fix it. You're not just going to move on to the second section. They're going to fix the first section. Okay, the first section's good. Now I'm only going to look at the second section. Then I'm going to put them together and make sure that I'm working. And then I'm just going to keep going down. So you always start kind of top to bottom, keep it working. And the thing that I'm going to show you today is the VS Code debugger. I'm going to show you a couple ways to actually get it to work, because some people were struggling with it. These are other things that I saw in the lecture questions chat that I definitely want to cover. So the first one, though, I still don't know how to fix it yet, but it's still on the back of my my log to kind of look at. But whenever you get in the debugger, and this is only from, I've only seen it on Mac devices, but then I saw somebody was having this problem, not have this problem today. I don't know. If you have this problem, reach out to me and we might do a one-on-one session to get that fixed, because that's not good. The other things that a lot of people are talking about, like pushing with get still, and then what's the difference between push and push origin main. I'm just going to address this one right now. There are sometimes, and this is commands in general, that they're so common that the people writing the commands don't want to have to type the same thing over and over again. So if you leave off things or do something slightly different, or they do shortcuts, meaning, remember there was npm install, and then you could also do npm I. Well, here's what happened. A developer that wrote npm and those commands, they would have to write npm install all the time, and they're like, this is too much work, so I'm just going to make it npm I, so it's faster. Same thing with Git. Git does the same thing. When you do Git, add, and then just the dot, that's because somebody was like, I don't want to have to type Git add this file, Git add this file, Git add this file. I just want it to do it, and we're going to make a command, and that command is Git add dot, and it adds all of it. So same thing with the Git push. When you do Git push, if you do not state where you're pushing it to, it will assume whatever branch you're on, and again, we haven't really defined what branches are, but whatever branch you're on, it's going to push it right up to that branch. And because we haven't dealt with branches, you're not switching branches right now, so yours will be main every time. So the dot does mean current working directory. I might try to show you that dot doesn't always cover everything. So if you go inside the directory and do dot, it does everything after that. It doesn't always include the ones that are outside your directory. So that's why it is a little confusing whenever you do add, and it doesn't actually add everything. If you always go back to your root, I do all of my Git commands on the root of my project. For instance, and I'll show you this in a little bit, the JavaScript project, the root is JavaScript project, JavaScript -project. When you go into the individual chapters and then go into the examples, you need to go into those to run your JavaScript code. But whenever you do Git and try to push it back up, sometimes what I do is I always back out to my root whenever I get to Git. Because then whatever I do, it does all of that. When I do Git add dot, it adds all of it. If you do Git add in just the one folder, it's just going to do that one folder and any subdirectories. And then untracked and tracked, or staged. I'll briefly talk about that whenever I go into this autograder thing. So, or not autograder, the assignment one. The other thing that was brought up is like, what is a test? How do I get a test? Several of you eventually through communicating on Discord and reading on Discord have realized that npm space test, if you're in that, and you're wherever the test folder is, if you're in that directory, it'll run your test, which is also the same as your autograder. And then also Jason, one of the we don't call them TAs, IAs. He made a video and posted in the general chat that kind of went over that as well. I don't mind going over it again, but if you want to watch his, it's obviously a lot shorter than this whole lecture. So we're going to go over this. Something that I want to express and try to get, and then also receive feedback on how to get you guys to do this. If you are not typing or posting anything in Discord, we can assume one of two things. Either you are advanced in your board and you're just already, checked out, or you don't understand anything and you're not wanting to speak up. That's usually the two things. Here's what I'm going to say about both sides. If you are an advanced kind of person and you're like, I already got part 1, 2, and 3 done of the graded assignment because I've already done JavaScript before. I've done a little bit of front end work because there are some people here that have done that, but then have not done anything in Java. So in Java, you'll have to, struggle like everybody else. You should be helping other people in here. And what that does for you, I think I said it in lecture 1, anybody can learn JavaScript. But being able to communicate and evaluate and mentor and all those other things that are not JavaScript are what employers want. Here's my little personal soapbox for 2 seconds. Right now, even Google is laying more engineers off, and those engineers are amazing engineers. But why are even good engineers not getting jobs right now? It's because, in my opinion, we have for so long taken engineers that are super bright but cannot communicate. And now that we have the talent base, like you guys going through LaunchCode and you guys working super hard, you guys are going to be able to do almost what they're able to do. But if you're able to communicate, they're going to hire you over somebody that even has experience, because if their track record is you give them something to do, they can knock it out, but then you can't go to them and say, hey, how did you do this? Or can you talk to the business on what you're doing? And they don't know how to talk. They want somebody that can communicate. They want somebody that works on a team. That's what the business is really striving for now. So even if you are that person that is like, I know everything that's going on here, it'll be another 4 weeks before I understand, before I actually get challenged with anything. I am challenging you right now to get on Discord, and when you see a homework situation that somebody has, jump on there and try to help them. And the struggle is going to be, are you going to be able to communicate in a way that in your technical knowledge, can you explain it to a non-technical person right now to help them get technical? Because that is a skill that is more important than actually learning JavaScript. So flex those skills every time you can. Same thing goes for right after you learn how to do something. If you see somebody else having that same exact question that you just figured out, please help them out. And what you're thinking is, how do I type this? How do I communicate this in a way so that they can understand what I know now? And then what happens is you get people down at, the people that are really struggling, they're seeing a lot of communication, and hopefully you're inspiring them to get on there and start communicating as well. I need more communication on Discord. Just how it is. So I did skip the question about functions. What is a function? We'll see an example, but more or less it's a section of code. It's pretty much it is. But how did I know? And this is why I kind of skipped it, because I'm going to show you the assignment 1 that has the function. How did I know that it was even there? Because there were some people that pointed it out. How did they know? So obviously, I tried to skim over a lot of the material. Like I said, it should have been about 40-ish minutes. I think I got 35 minutes in there. So let's go to some live coding. Hopefully there's nothing major here. Okay. I can start in a lot of different places. I have mainly these 3 things I want to go over and the graded assignment. I'm going to go over the graded assignment first. So that is some questions about where are the expectations? How do I know what I'm supposed to be doing? So in the assignment 1, there's the project introduction. There's also part 1, part 2, and part 3. And in Canvas, I think it was pretty clear on part 1. So you only need to do part 1. So I think it linked it to either one of these top 2. It didn't link it to the part 1, but you got to read these other ones anyway. So assignment 1 says there's an introduction, minimum viable quiz. That's where I'm going to start. So for part 1, I need to do this stuff. And many of you read through that. What I like is right here, this is what you're looking for. There's only one big test suite, so there's only one test file. So, and it failed. And I told you that last time it's going to fail. In that one test file, there are actually 17 tests that are being ran. And if you got this done, 6 of them passed. I will tell you that that last little section, I don't know if it's this I can't remember which one, but one of these technically is not tested, because some of you are like, hey, I didn't even do the last one and it still passed my test. Just understand that happens sometimes. You are going to be talking through your code with your IA. So they will look at the accuracy of some of this that the tests don't pick up. The tests are meant to be there so that you have more of an instant understanding if you did more or less what you needed to do. So the tests are for you to understand that, or to have a a safety net of knowing if you're doing it, if you're on the right track. And again, this is what it kind of looks like when you run npm test. It'll tell you the first 6 tests pass and the other ones don't. So I'm going to go through how to get this again. I'm going to go through some other stuff that people have been asking about. So I'm gonna go super fast to this first part though. I need to get the actual code. Here it is. So you go here, because everybody should have already done this. I know my screen is itty bitty. I hit the fork button. I'm gonna say, yes, I want it on my personal branch. So now it's GitHub, my CoolCat254. It's forking it. Jason said this in his thing, but when you fork a branch, it deactivates your actions. So remember on several of you had this question on graded assignment 0. Feels so long ago, but it's just a couple weeks ago. You have to go in here to the actions and actually enable them. And I know my screen is super small, but I'm going to go fast through this because this should be kind of review. But make sure you open up your actions. And what's going to happen is that'll allow inside. I will zoom in. I'll show you on VS Code. So I'll show you where the GitHub workflows are. So make sure that you enable your actions. And again, all of this, now that you have IAs, because I know several of you were frustrated in that assignment 0 because there was not a lot of instant support and you didn't know almost who to talk to sometimes, but now you do. Now you have your IA, and these are things that will get addressed. You just got to be patient sometimes. So I'm going to copy my code. I'm going to go over here. I'm going to go to my LaunchCode thing that I set up. I'm going to go to my graded assignments. I'm going to open up in my terminal. Oh, it went on my other screen. So on here, I'm going to say git clone that thing. All right. Here is the first common mistake. If I open in VS Code right here in this directory, it is not the best directory to open up in. So I remember seeing somewhere somebody said, well, I made a graded assignments folder just like you did, just like you suggested. Absolutely, that's perfect, because you're going to have multiple in here. But your graded assignments folder is not the folder that you want to open up in VS Code. It's actually the graded assignment that you just downloaded, which is the candidate testing auto-graded. So make sure that you're opening up from this folder, not from your graded assignments folder. And I have this special thing that says open with code right here. So in here, I will make this bigger. So again, my top root on the left should not be graded assignments, the folder that I created. It should be the repository name. Let's just call it that. The repository name should be there. So let's inspect this. The GitHub workflows, this is your auto grading. This is a YAML file, YML, it's pronounced YAML. This is a YAML file that whenever you push up to GitHub, it looks for, and if it's there, it does these things. So it says on push. Anytime you push your code up, it doesn't even say which branch. Like you can get really refined with this where it only works if you push it to your main branch. It only works if, I mean, there's so many different things that GitHub Actions can do. What it's going to do is it's going to build your project here. It's going to more or less run on top of a Ubuntu instance. Ubuntu, kind of like Mac. It's an operating system. The steps that it's going to do is it's going to check out your code. It's going to use Node.js. This is where it installs it. It's going to install version 20. It's going to install the packages. Remember how whenever I download this, I haven't done it yet, but I'm supposed to do npm install. If I don't tell GitHub to do that, then it doesn't do that, and it doesn't work. So it's going to do npm install. Then it's going to do this npm run build if present. So it's going to look to see if it's present, and it's going to build it. And then it's going to execute the test cases. So this script here is your auto grading. Never touched it. Just wanted to show it to you. But that's where it goes. Here's your actual test file. If you see here, this is test 1, test 2, test 3. Here's the things that it can expect. So what test 1 is doing is it's expecting the type of your solution.candidate name to be a string. So if you type in a number for your candidate name, this thing will fail. If you do not have anything in there, it will fail. It needs to be a string. That's what it's looking for. And I can go through all of these, but another good question, really good question was, can I make up my own questions? Because, who was the first American woman in space? I mean, that's an amazing question, but some of you have better questions. Because the test right here says that question has to be that, if you make it anything else, it will fail the autograder. So I'll try to zoom in just a little bit more. All right. Hopefully that's good enough, because if I get any bigger than that, then it's too big for me. So yeah, so the candidate testing.test.js, this .test means that it's a test file. So JavaScript knows that it's not like a normal file. And when you actually build it, and if you would ship this off to run, it would actually not even look at this file. It's just for test purposes. This is how you figure out which one. So if you have a problem with test 4 for whatever reason, you can go here and look and say, now this on line 21 is what LaunchCode put in there. So this could be anything it wants to. This is to help whoever's evaluating this to know what the test does. But the actual test is this thing here, which is they're expecting a type of your correct answer to be string. And if it's not, this thing fails. I got a question. You finished part 1 before enabling action. I don't think that's going to be a problem. You can do what Wilson said, which is just turn them on and then recommit something, and it would work. The other thing is you're going to be explaining this code to your IAs. If this was the final turn in, like after part 3, then 100% I would expect that to be on. Part 1, the reason that I like it being in 3 different parts is so you start getting familiar with this process without the stress of, it has to be done right now. We're going to try to help you through that. So, and yeah, you only need to do part 1 for today. That you will eventually do the other ones. This git ignore are the things that it ignored. So whenever I do npm install, it's going to put this node modules folder in there, but we don't need to send that to GitHub. GitHub doesn't want that. So we're going to ignore it. I think somebody else said that, I don't know if it was on this assignment or something else, but that .ds store was a problem. It's usually in your git ignore, so it doesn't show, it doesn't pop up there and send it to your repo. All right. 2 biggest problems here. First of all, this is the first time, and I don't think I saw it in the directions, so I'm going to state it now, but this is a little frustrating. All of your code is going to go into this candidate testing.js. The problem is, and just by looking at this, I can't tell if that's the thing I need to run. So by this one thing, I don't know yet. But it is a little frustrating that all of your code goes here, but then you eventually find out this is not the file that you need to run. You're actually going to run the index.js. So this is the file that you need to run. Now, the reason I know that, 2 things. We haven't went over web development, but oftentimes in web development, if you see an index.html or an index.javascript, that's your starting place. So if you see one of those, just know from now on, that's where you need to start. What this does is it makes a quiz, which, what is a quiz? It actually grabs this candidate testing. Even though it doesn't say .js, you don't have to say that. This could say .js. It wouldn't hurt anything if it did. But this quiz is this code, whatever this code is, which is the other file. So what's happening here is on line 1, it is making the quiz. And then on line 2, it is running this program. Well, what does run program mean? Well, run program, and I'll tell you how I did that in a second. Run program is this function that's actually on line 42 of our other file here. So do you see how it says candidate testing JS, candidate testing JS? This gives me a sneak peek into this file. It points me right to the line that I need to go. So over here, I can go down to line 42, not the test one. I don't need the test. You never need to look at the test until you're actually testing. But on this thing here, if I go to line 42, here's the function that it is running. This function then calls 1, 2, 3 other functions. So again, if I went here and I said, okay, if I did not run the index.js, what would happen is it would run this. Okay, so I have an input that I can use. I have some things I can use. Yep. A function is only ran when called. So then whenever I say ask for name, if I try to find this in the file, it is getting ran inside this function, but this function is never getting called in here, inside this own JavaScript file. We will, I guarantee you, we will go over more about functions at a later date. We will go over more in depth on actually how this stuff works. I'm just, right now what you need to know is when you see this word function, that means that this block of code here is a section, is a function. It's all grouped together, and it only runs whenever this thing gets called. When you have function here, that's setting it up. It's not calling it, it's just setting it up. Now, how do I know where it's getting called? This is the cool thing about VS Code, and IntelliJ does this also. If you can't see my keyboard, but I'm going to push the control, which I think for Macs is the equivalent of command. So if I press down on control, you can see that my mouse turns into a pointer. So I'm not pressing control, I am pushing control. When I push on control and I click this, it actually tells me where this stuff is getting called at. So it's saying that it's getting called here, which is actually getting called here. When I click on this, it pops out to my index.js. So the cool thing about having IDEs is if you have questions, if you hold control, you can click on these things. And these things will go other places. And I'm just randomly clicking, not that you don't care what I'm actually clicking on. I'm just showing you that it goes to different places, and that's where some learning actually happens. You're like, well, why does it go there? And then start looking at it. So again, going back to the beginning, you're going to have to run the index.js to actually get your code to run. It doesn't actually get called inside here. Just reading the comments just in case. Okay. If I run this right now, there are multiple ways to run this. So this is another thing that I want to talk about, some misconceptions here. If I go over here and hit run and debug, it should work. It should. The one that I like better is if you go to the top, go to run, and you do start debugging, which in LaunchCode's textbook, it does say to hit F5. I remember reading that, and I was like, this doesn't say F5. This says Control-Shift-D, which is not F5. And then I realized that I actually like the F5 one better. So I'm going to open up my index.js. I'm going to go over here to run. I'm going to hit start with debugging or F5. I get to select which of these I want. I'm going to select Node.js. And it should run. Now, this error. Now, remember, we just talked about errors and debugging, right? We have to start getting used to looking at this and at least not freaking out. This says uncaught error, cannot find module, red line, green line sync. We should have seen this error 20 times last week, and we know what this one now means. It means that I need to install this module because it doesn't know what it is. And remember, to install it, I'm going to go to my terminal. I need to make sure that my terminal is open up in the right folder. Here is another secret tip on how to know if I'm in the right thing. It's called LS. Does anybody remember what LS stands for? Yeah, it stands for list. What I want to do is I'm going inside this directory, this folder, and I want to list out everything in there. If you do LS, if I'm in the right folder, I will see if I need to do npm install. There was a lot of ifs in that I just said. Do ls, you should see this package.json. If you don't see that package.json, that means one of two things. Either you're in the wrong directory and you need to move to the right directory, or you don't need to run npm install. So some of our exercise things, we didn't need it. So I did ls, I saw that there's a package.json, so I know that I need to do npm install. And it's going to install eventually. All right. Here's the crazy thing. It just installed 291 packages. That's not just my normal. The reason why npm install is so powerful is whenever you create something and you assign what dependencies, meaning we depend, we cannot do ask a user a question without this module. So we are dependent on that module. If we don't have it, we can't ask the user a question. Because we are dependent on that, if I put those inside this package.json, then it will download any dependency I put in here. So I don't have to even worry about remembering what module, remembering what version, remembering what anything. Once I do it the first time, it should set me up with a package.json so that whenever I give that code to somebody else, or I go deploy that, or I go whatever, this thing will follow. And then all I have to do is run npm install, and it installs all the dependencies for me. I don't have to reinstall all those independently. So if it did install something slightly different, don't worry about it. Oh, audited. Maybe I already had something there. I don't know. All right, now let's go back. And again, so somebody else said, well, instead of going up here and hitting run and hitting debug, this F5 debug, I could just do node space, if I could type. Now that I know that I need to do the index, and again, I use tab quite a bit because I am almost certifiably the worst speller you'll ever meet. So I always use tab to check my work there. And they need funding. That's because some of these are open source. And so they want money. All right. So I just ran this and there's no errors, but nothing happened. And of course, I'm not going to tell you how to code this. That's not part of this lecture. This lecture is just to get you to the point so that you can at least start programming this. The things I do want to show you is some Git stuff. So it says modify your, this is to do too. It says define candidate name. I'm going to put something there. Remember, I'm not teaching you how to do the coding part. I'm doing the Git stuff right now. So whenever I go over to my Git over here, my source control off to the left, this helps me. It says that there's this new package lock.json. That's fine to have. What that did was it locked the versions that I currently have in my package JSON. This is a normal thing. It usually gets pushed up the first time, and then you don't have to worry about it. But do you see how I made this change, and I don't see it over here? This is another common thing that I mentioned last time. If you see this white dot up here, that means that I have not saved. So when I hit Control S, which is, I use this all the time, Control S, this white dot goes away. And then over here, and now it shows me that I have changed this candidate testing.js file. Some of you are asking, well, I didn't want to do that. There is this button right here that says discard changes. So I can just hit this and confirm, and it just discarded all the changes that I did. Now, I try not to do that. But let's say that you were really messing with things and you were way down the rabbit hole and you just were like, I just want a fresh start. Sometimes you can do that. Only if you haven't committed yet, though. So once you commit, that kind of takes a snapshot of your code. And you can back out a commit. I know how to do that. You guys, that's more advanced than what you're needing to know right now, but there are ways to do that. But let's say that I did want to save this. So I look at this change. You can actually commit in several different ways. You can commit. Technically, you can hit this commit and push. It'll commit the thing and push it to GitHub for you. There's a lot of different things you can do. Something else that somebody was talking about was staged. So if I go to Git status, if you look here, it says these changes are not staged for the commit. So if I go right here and I say git commit and I try to commit it, it's actually going to throw me a little bit of a message here. It says on branch main, your branch is already up to date. There's nothing that you need to push up. But over here, it says that I have some changes. It tells you, luckily, in these things that you need to do git add. So this adds, these are unstaged. These are not staged, and they need to be staged. Now, the difference with untracked files, there is a difference. I'll need to re-look up what this is. Like we talked about package lock JSON doesn't really matter. That's why this is down here rather than up here. Actually, that's not it. I think these are new files. That's what I think it is. Tracked, untracked means that they're new files that they've never been there before, where not staged means like modification of already tracked files. So this file is already being tracked because it was already there, where this one is not tracked. That's what it is. So git, add, and then my dot. So some of you were doing like node space dot because I was like, hey, this will just do what's right here sometimes. But remember, every program like Git has its shortcut, but Node does not have that. So if you're doing Node, you got to do node space and be very explicit in what JavaScript file you want. But when I do git add here and then go back and do git status, now it says that I have changes that are ready to be committed. So I think some of you need to get more comfortable with doing this git status just all the time. It's never going to hurt anything. It's just checking your status. So if it's, now that I've added it, it says everything's good. And if you look over here on the left, staged changes versus just changes. So remember, we want them to be staged so that then we can now commit. So now I can do a git commit. And now it says that there's some files here. And what I think some of you in VS Code need to start using this source control just visually. I wouldn't click the button. but now it's telling me right here that here's some changes in a change log that needs to go up to main. So I can sync those changes, or I think you need to get used and comfortable to the terminal of doing a git push. And then this goes away. And then if I do a git status, it says that my branch is up to date. I'm going to teach you one more git thing, and then I'm going to answer some questions that's been going on in the chat. If you do a git log, once you get more familiar, a log will actually tell you a log. So remember, I called mine changes. So it says here that I CoolCat254, made a commit and that I called changes. The person before me, Sally, I'm assuming as the LaunchCode person, Sally did a pull request to update node 20. So this logs all the commits. So there are some people that believe that you should be committing your code and you can have 20 commits and it be a just fine thing. There's some people that say that you should really only commit whenever you're kind of at a finished or a snapshot type stage. It really doesn't matter at your stage of the game. You just need to get very comfortable typing these commands. So I don't care if you commit every day, even if your code's bad. On the other hand, what does help me whenever I'm helping people, whenever the code gets big enough, so like one file is no big deal, but when we get to like 10 files, you committing your changes and pushing them up to GitHub makes it easier for me to then go to your GitHub repo. So instead of you taking a screenshot of your code, what you would do is send me a link to your GitHub that has all of your changes on there, even the bad stuff. So then I can just go up there and look at your code. Mainly your IAs will be doing that, but just throwing that as an example, if you commit your code and push it, even if it's bad, then you can send that GitHub link and then they can look at it. Question was, the other thing is, once you do the git log, those of you that are used to this colon, you're going to do, you're going to have to hit something to get out of it. I hit Q. Why didn't it go out? The other thing that I love doing is just hitting this delete button up here. It just kills my terminal. And then I can go back and make a new terminal. The other thing that somebody said is that you can actually type in clear. So if I do git status, and then I'm like, I don't want that stuff anymore, you can do just clear. And it clears out your terminal. Some people need that, some people don't. I do need that whenever I change thought processes. So if I'm doing one thing and I change to a different thought process, oftentimes I'll clear. If I'm doing just git stuff, I won't clear. Just me personally. Control C usually does back out of that, but I don't know why it didn't back out of the log. Trying to see if there's any more questions on this. Yeah, so saving, unfortunately, VS Code is horrible about auto saving. I think every other program that I work in does auto save. So you do need to get comfortable with saving. If somebody wants to be super nice for those people, I know there's a way to change in your own VS configuration to auto save all the time. Somebody might post that somewhere, probably in Discord, not in this chat. That might help out some people, but yeah, definitely save. Yeah, commit. I think technically you can, I don't know if you can. It's just common practice to do the -m and put in the message. Yeah, and then there's the workflow recap again. Nice. Fine. Is it really that easy? File, autosave, file. Oh, there is an autosave right there. Click that. I'll do it again for you because several of you need to see this. File, autosave. Click this autosave on. Because then whenever I go to this thing, oh, it did auto-saved it. And see how that white, and it already put it over here. So I would strongly suggest, yes, doing the file autosave. That might save some of you some headache. Autosave will not push to get for you. There's been a problem with people forgetting to save before they then push to GitHub, or forgetting to save before they do the node space Java file or a JavaScript file. And so autosave is going to make sure that that one inconvenience is taken out of the equation of struggling. And then you can fine tune them in preferences. Yeah, play with all of that you want to. I'm gonna now show a couple other things. All right. Okay, yep, it's this one. So all I have in this file, I have a bunch of things that I could do, right? And I'm going to show most of these. Some of them I will just show to show, and some of these I will show to let you kind of think and ponder on. For instance, this one. This one is going to ask me, remember we went on the lecture, are you in lecture? And I was like, if this is true, then you're happy, because everybody should be happy in lecture. And then if you're not in the lecture, you shouldn't be happy, right? So I'm going to run this. There are multiple ways to do this. I'm going to use the terminal. Now, this is where I'm going to close this a little bit, make this screen a little bit better and for you guys. I've already been running this, so I'm going to do node, and this is my class 2.js. And it asks me right here, are you in lecture? And I'm going to say yes. And it's going to say that I'm happy. I'm going to do this again, and I'm going to say no, and it's going to still say I'm happy. And that's because right here, I want it to be true or false, like true. And so let's do true. True. But then let me do it again, and let me type in false. This is the confusing one. When I type in false, it doesn't go to where I expect to be in the false. Here's the reason why. Here's the tip on the debugger. I'm actually going to rerun this in debugger. So I'm going to go up here, run. Before I do that, I am going to set a breakpoint. I know I barely briefly mentioned this, but I debug this all the time doing this. I'm going to set a breakpoint. What this does is it's going to break my code. It's going to say stop right here. It does not do that if you do the node, because that's not a debugger. You have to have a debugger running. So that's why if I go up to run and I do start debugging with this F5, and then I go, it should have asked me for this is what some of you were talking about. I don't know why that was not working, and I really don't. And I wish I might spend a little bit of time, but if I do this start with debugging, sometimes it doesn't work. What I'd like to do, no, because it would exit with this code. So some of you are getting like a code 1 or code something or other. I'm still trying to figure this one out. What I like to do, also, I work in IntelliJ all the time, which is the Java when we get to Java, and it is so much better of a console than VS Code. On the other hand, it can only do Java. Where VS Code, I can write JavaScript. This is where I do my Python stuff when I write Python. I can actually do Java in here if I wanted to. So it's much more powerful in the sense that it can do lots of different things, but the debugger is not my favorite. But if you do this JavaScript debugger terminal, what that does is it actually opens up a terminal, and then I just treat it like normal. You see how this looks just like any other terminal? And then I would do my node class to whatever. No. Am I in the right? Let me see if I'm in the right thing. Let me do ls. IntelliJ definitely has some good paid features, but it's free. has a free version. LS. Oh, looky there. I'm definitely not in the right thing. So I need to go over here. The fastest way to figure this out, if I want this file, you can open up an integrated terminal or copy relative path. Now I'm in the right path. So now I'm in my Booleans and conditions exercises. Now when I run node class 2, there it pops up. Another reason why I do the tab, so that it always tells me if I'm right. This will actually debug. It asks me, are you in lecture? It's asking me this thing right here. How do I know it's in debug? Because of this thing right here. So whenever I say false, it's going to pop open the debug menu, and it's going to tell me if I hover over student in lecture, it tells me what it is. This is really cool. It tells me that it's false, but do you see those quotes around it? They're single quotes. That means it's not false as in a Boolean value, it's false as in a string. And remember when I told you earlier, that is a truthy value in JavaScript. That returns true. So no matter what I put in here for false, it's not going to work. I need to return a falsy value. So if I rerun this, and then I go back to my lecture just for a second, and we go to those falsy values. If I type in, do you see, if I type in an empty string, it'll work. All of these other ones will be converted to strings the way that I have it set up. But if I leave this as a blank and let it run, finally I get student is not happy because blank, like an empty string, is a falsy value. If I set this to be false, if I would spell right, and rerun this, I'm going to not rerun it or I'm going to take away this breakpoint. I know I'm going super fast. You don't need to know all of this. The main thing that I want you to focus on is what is going in this system right here, and how is it getting evaluated down here? Is it being true or false? And when I type in false with no quote, it finally goes to the false thing here. You could, that's exactly what I was thinking. You could wrap this. What did they call that? What was the vocabulary word that they used whenever you change it? Because they did it to a number. Anybody remember? Starts with the C. Yeah, convert. Typecasting. Typecasting is a yes, but I think it's just a conversion. So you're converting it. You'll hear that a lot. You're going to convert it to a Boolean. So I could do this. And then this should work every single time, right? So then I would do if I do false here, it still says student is happy. Because false, again, as my input, is still a string. So no matter what I do here, it's still going to be a string. Let's try the other falsy ones for a second. If I did a 0, I think 0 was in the falsy thing. This one should give me my my false. Yep, there's my student is not happy when it's 0. What was some other ones? False, empty string we tried, null, undefined, not a number. If I do this, not happy. So the biggest thing that I want you to get out of this, what I'm doing right this second, is these 6 things convert to false if they're asked if they're true or false. Anything else besides these will always return true. So then the question is asked, what was that question? Why does, I don't think I put it in here now that I'm thinking about it. I did not. Remember how somebody said, if you did console log, let's do false or true, like this. I'm going to comment this out so it doesn't run. Then I'm going to run it down here. So this said false, but we have a true statement here. Here's the other weird caveat. This is why you need to actually pay attention in JavaScript. Remember when I said that there's a lot of loosey stuff going on here, and it doesn't quite always work the exact same way you want to? This is the exact thing I'm talking about. This does not convert it to true or false. What this converts it to is this is a truthy statement, so this is true. This is a truthy statement, this is true. And so it's going to return true, but when it returns true, it returns the first true statement that you put in there. I'm still confused, even though I'm saying that, what's actually going on there. You don't have this problem with strictly typed languages. They don't do this. It's JavaScript. This is one of those things where, remember, this is a string, so it's going to be true. This is going to evaluate to true. Is it true or true? Yes. So it's going to return the first one, mainly because they're strings. So here's the other weird thing. If I take away the strings, this now evaluates the false. This evaluates the true. So it's still going to be true, but it's actually, let me even type in, I don't know, fruit. It doesn't really matter what it is. Does anybody want to guess what's going to return from this? Let's check. They return fruit. What the heck? I know why I did that. I'm going to explain in a second, but still, that I don't understand, like, logistically why they would write a language like this, but this is what's happening. An or statement says, is this true? No, it's false. Okay, but is this true? And remember, we said, is that a part of any of the faulty stuff? It's not. It's on the truthy side because anything that's not faulty has to be truthy. So that's a truthy statement. So it's going to return that statement. Whatever it is. It's not going to return true. It's going to return that statement. Yes, fruit is always true. So if you want to go down this rabbit hole, go down that rabbit hole. This is the last. I think I'm going to stop talking about this because the more I think about it, the more my brain even hurts. All you have to know is be very careful when you're dealing with booleans and conditionals, that when you deal with anything besides true and false, weird things happen in JavaScript. Right. I'm going to comment this thing out. I want to talk about a couple more things. I'm going to actually, okay, let's do this one for a second. How many hours have you worked? So whenever I run this, it's going to ask me just that this one works like normal. If I say 4, well, 4 is less than 8, so it's going to say I need more coffee. As you can see right here, I'm actually going to open up a normal terminal because I'm not going to, let's do a normal terminal. No, I lost my place. Okay. I'm going to do node. Right. It says how many hours? I'm going to type 4, or I did 4. It says I need more coffee. I'm going to type 44, and it's going to say I need more sleep. When I do this and I type I don't know, It says I need more sleep. Here's the reason why. When you type in something that's not a number, so whenever I typed I don't know in there, it converted to NaN, and NaN cannot be evaluated here. So it can't even check to see if this is true or false. It automatically just kind of backs out of that and says, we're not going to do that one. If you have an else statement, we're going to do that one. So I don't know, when trying to evaluate to a number, says not a number, it does the else one, which kind of makes sense. I wanted to briefly talk about the else if. So what if it was, remember the other one was for, and then it said else if. And then I think it was carb coma. So if I say 2, it's going to say I need more coffee. If I say 6, it's going to say carb coma. And if I say anything else like 9, it's going to say I need more sleep. I know I typed those in super fast because my point is whenever I typed in 2, it evaluated this one first. And since it was true, it did this and it skipped everything else. And that's super important because one of the common mistakes I see in programming is this one right here. Instead of making this an else if, I just made it another if. So now whenever I type in 2, it's going to say I need more coffee and it says carb coma. Because it runs this one's true, so it does it. But because there's not an else if, it's just an if, it's going to run each of these separately. Right. Hopefully that explains the if, else if thing that I sometimes see. I'm just going to briefly show these other ones real quick because we're starting to run out of time a little bit, and then I want DeMarco to be able to talk. This is exactly what I was showing you with that advanced thing here. So if my number of posts is the input I'm getting, I can actually evaluate that in one line here. So again, I'm not going to really show this a bunch, but let's say that I did 6 posts this week. It's going to have this prediction. It's going to say, are you going to pass this course? And then the actual variable is either no or yes. And if I said 6, it says no, because you're not communicating. It evaluates it here. If it's true, it does this one. If this is false, it does this one. So if you're more advanced, definitely look at ternary operators, the common thing amongst professional developers. The last, third to last thing I'm going to show. Has anybody seen the little program called BizBuzz? Right, so turning comments, if some of you are, so these are tricks that I just know. If I highlight what I want to comment or uncomment, and I hold control and hit this backslash, this character right here, if I select all this and I hit control and backslash, it'll comment in and out for me. So, yeah. I have this as a for loop. It's going to go over way too many numbers for me. But what this says, this is supposed to meet several questions. Somebody asked, how do I even know what this, you called it a modulus, a module operator, which is what it is. But then really what does it do? And so, like, how do I look at that? And all that means is way back in math school, whenever you would do division and you did the long division, And remember, you would do a division problem and you'd say that it went in so many times, but you'd have a remainder left over. That's all this is doing, is calculating the remainder. So 5 is super easy. That means if it's a 5, the remainder is 0, because 5 goes into 5 evenly. 10 would be 0. 15, if it's a multiple of it, it's going to return 0, because the remainder, when you divide, it's going to be 0. But then all the other ones, you're going to have to try to calculate the remainder. 5's easy, because if I said, 52 mod 5, I don't care that it goes in 10 times. I care that it goes in 10 times, but has a remainder of 2, because 52, I'd take out the 50 even one, like the 50 whole ones, and I'd be left with 2 as a remainder. So that's what this thing does right here. The other thing I wanted to show is if I'm doing this, the order of these Booleans, these conditionals, so I'm going to evaluate 5, I'm going to evaluate 3, and then if it's neither of those, I'm going to see if it's 5 and 3. So when I run this, and then pull this up, oh, there's an error. Imagine that. This is one of those errors that we talked about, or was briefly talked about earlier inside the debugger, called a reference error. What's really cool about this reference error is it's telling me I is not defined. It tells me it's console log I, so I can do a control F right here. And the other thing it tells me is what line it's on right here. So I know that it's in this file on that line. You can also see that right here in this file, this line. And technically, this 21 is how many characters over from the end it is. It's not always accurate. Sometimes it does 1. Sometimes it actually gives the right characters. So don't always trust that. But if I counted including spaces right here, somewhere around 21-ish. I can't remember the number. Yeah, 21. There it is. It's that character. So if I just hit the next key, like the arrow key over, this is my 21st character in that line. That's why it's 4421, line 44, number 21. And if you look here, it says that it doesn't know what I is. And if I look up here, there is no I's up here at all. Well, there is. There's this one right here. So what I need to do is change this to something it knows, which in this case, I know this program enough that it's going to be num. Then I'm going to rerun this. I will cause errors in here, so don't think that I'm never cause errors, because I will. But this one I did purposely put in there just because that reference error is something we were talking about just a little bit ago. When I do this, it prints out these. It says 1, 2, and instead of 3, it prints fizz. On 5, it prints fizz buzz. I should have changed the console log. It's not. We'll get those that know this know that I copy and pasted something wrong. But anyway, what I want to show is, are there numbers that are both divisible by 3 and 5? And 15 is. So if I go down to 15, I'm expecting this buzz to be there. Buzz is never in here. Fizz buzz is, but buzz is not. That is because in my logic here, if a number is divisible by 5 right here, it will never get to this, is it divisible by 3 or 5, 3 and 5. And it'll never get there because it stopped right here. So when you have branching like this, order matters. So what this should be is this one should be here, and this one should be here. And if I run this one, it'll do what I expect, which is when it's divisible by 3 and 5, which is 15, so I'm going to go to 15, it says FizzBuzz. If it's only divisible by 3, it's going to say fizz. So 3, 6, 9. I know I went too fast. 9. If it's divisible by 5, it's going to say buzz. So that's 5, 10. But then when it's divisible by 3 and 5, it's going to do both. The order of these matter. I know I didn't go into a huge explanation of, why in this particular case that particular order matters, but I do want to show that order of these matter, which is why I'm not going to go over the one that I thought I was going to go over, which is part 3, the exercises in chapter 5. There was some questions about how to get these orders to work. Because I am over time, I'm not going to go over that as a class. But in chapter 5 exercises, that last part, I think it's part 5. Well, not, I guess, the last part, but the second to last part, part 5, it talks about these ors and these ands, and some people were having questions. If you still have questions about ands and ors, please get a hold of me and post something, and I'll try to come up with some kind of tidbit on it that I might be able to show next lecture. But unfortunately, because of time, I'm not going to go over that one, because hopefully I explained it here enough that order of those do matter. Another question that was asked of me, are these the same? When we have engine indicator light not red blinking, is that the same as not engine indicator light equal red blinking? The syntax here, these are not the same. And somebody stated that. But I think the original question with the appropriate syntax is, are these the same? And I think they are. So I'm going to show you the syntax different. This one, if it's not red blinking, it's going to print true. So is this not red blinking? This one's going to print true. Let me get my terminal. Oh, do I still have that one? I do have that one. Sorry. Comment that one out. Fine. This says false and then true. And we said it should be true because this is not red blinking. The problem is, and as somebody said, this is saying not engine indicator light, which is not okay. If you were originally asking if I evaluate, I'm going to put some spaces in here so you can kind of see it better. If I evaluate this first and get a true and false statement, and then do the not, which is the opposite operator. So if it's true, it'll be false. If it's false, it'll be true. This, I think, is what the original poster was kind of asking. And in this case, I think these will mean the same thing. No matter what I type this, if it's red blinking or if it's green, it'll evaluate to be the same thing. Yeah, it'll either be true or false together. So I'm thinking the original question was, can I put a not and then change it in here and vice versa? And that does most of the time work. The part that gets harder is when you add or and into that, you have to like change everything. So I was going to go over this, but I think that I'm going to try to cut it shorter so you have time to do studio and Jamarco has time to talk. So if you want to talk more about how you can convert these nots into a sentence, there was one little snippet on, I can't remember where it was, but that talked about this. It said, hey, are these two things the same? And if you look, the nots and the ands and ors were flipped, and they did mean almost the same thing. So just, I don't mind going over that at a later date. There was, I had a list and I lost my list. Fine. Get push function, test autogrider. I did not show that test on that assignment. But I think I answered most of the questions. If you do npm test, it'll be fine. When you push it up, the auto grader will work, but you have to turn it on. I think that's going to be it for today. This was the one, somebody posted something and I wrote it down and I can't find it, but somebody was posting about this one and had a question about this one. And I can't remember what the question was. So I'm sorry. If you have that question, post it in Discord and I will personally answer that and make a lengthy post on it so that it makes sense, because I was going to do it today. But I think that's, I'm going to glance through these.
Are you all able to hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank God. All right. So I'm going to get through these announcements really fast because I know we're cutting into studio time, and I know you all want to meet with your IAs. The most important thing, so graded assignment 1, I know you all have a ton of questions about that. So if you all aren't already aware, graded assignment 1 is broken up into 3 parts. So part 1 is due tonight. If you do not submit it by tonight, there is no late penalty. It'll be marked late just because we have a timestamp for it in Canvas. But you won't be losing credit if you do not submit it for tonight. And then, of course, the entire assignment is due on the 29th of this month. That is when you absolutely need to have it done, and that will be the hard deadline for the assignment. When you do complete part 1, be sure to notify your IA, and you'll have to conduct a demo with them. And all that means is you'll do a code walkthrough and just briefly explain what you did and your thought process around why you made the decisions that you made while writing your code and solving the problem. All right. Moving past that, so just some general things. So with our lines of communication, some of you all have been messaging me with questions in regards to the coursework. Although I may be able to help you in passing and when possible, any questions that you have in regards to the course content, please direct those to your IAs and they'll be able to assist you when possible. I'll be getting out a list, a complete list of the office hours for all of the IAs. So if your assigned IA is not available, you can also feel free to schedule open hours with other IAs as well. All right. And Philip has also graciously, opened himself up to help you all with any of the concepts outside of lecture time. And so feel free to drop some things in Discord. But I will also ask just to be respectful of his time because there are a lot of you all. And the first thing that I would recommend is, if you haven't, look for solutions to some of the challenges that you're coming up against in the assignments, to first try to solve them by doing a quick Google search with any of the errors that pop up and trying to solve it first before immediately reaching out for help. In regards to Studio, I see things popping up in the chat. I would encourage you to message me directly because I won't be getting to those right now because I'm trying to get through these announcements. With Studio, you all are to participate in the Studio assignments. When you get to Studio, the run of Studio is that your IA will do an overview of the assignment with you all. And then from there, you're to break off into groups and work on the Studio assignment together. And those studios are supposed to be completed in class, and you're not to be working on the graded assignment in class unless we've set aside or opened up that time for you all to do that. Moving past that, we do encourage you all to have your cameras on during lecture and studio as well, just as good practice, especially if you are going to eventually be looking towards landing a remote position. You'll just have to get used to being on camera, communicating, and making sure you set up your environment to be as professional as possible to participate in that kind of way. I did see some questions around the check your understandings in the textbook. Those are simply for you to check to see if once you read over a certain portion within that chapter to get your mind wrapped around whether or not you truly understood the concept. And then if you have not noticed, a majority of those questions will also pop up in the quiz for that chapter. And so that's where you'll be able to really answer those questions. And then just a reminder to everyone, if you have not added course staff as friends on Discord, please do that so you can send us direct messages and we get notifications for your direct messages to us. All right. That is all that I have for now. But like I said, feel free to message me in Discord and I will get back to you all as soon as possible. Take a quick 5-minute break and then head on over to studio. Thank you all.